So Snowfall has been on the air for the better part of like almost 7 years now. It's been one of the mainstay tentpole shows on FX for quite a while. We know that John Singleton, legendary director who we lost a couple of years ago, was really, sort of the driving force, the driving creative force behind the series and brought this show to life. And it's really been focusing on the birth of the crack epidemic in the 1980s, specifically on the West Coast in Los Angeles, and detailing sort of the rise of power with our main character, Franklin Saint, and just everything that he's undergone. And again, this sort of fits within a lexicon of shows that we've become quite accustomed to in the television landscape over the past 20 years. There's a ton of crime shows that we have often referenced that many people are watching and rewatching, things like The Wire or The Sopranos or Boardwalk Empire. This is
Yep.
obviously a very notable sweet spot, I think, for television. And so Snowfall sort of comes in at the tail end of that particular era, but again, does something a little bit different because we don't get that many black fronted shows really, taking place
Exactly.
within a certain time period that also has a primarily black cast and black creators and filmmakers. And also, again, the fact that it focuses on the crack epidemic, which hasn't been explored to the same extent as maybe some other sort of cultural touch points that we often acknowledge and recognize. But,
Mhm.
Snowfall just met its end. It finally wrapped up all of its storytelling again after 6 seasons of being on the air, which is quite a while. And I know that we briefly talked about it maybe about a year ago with season five, and we sort of knew that season six was going to start to wrap things up. But now the series finale has come and gone, and we certainly checked that out to just catch up with everything that was going to occur with Franklin Saint and all the people around him. But with all of that out the way, before we talk about any of the specific details, I just want to get your overall thoughts. What did you think about Snowfall season six this year?
Season six was fine, man. I think of course, ending shows will always be the hardest thing to do. I think for any particular show, man. Again, you can start strong, you can have a strong middle, but that ending, man, to be something satisfactory for everybody to chew on, for years to come, for everybody to want to revisit, I think is just so important of a thing. And I think Snowfall did it justice. I do. I think they did fine. Not everything in season six works for me, right? But I think overall, the overarching themes, the way things ended, where some things went, it worked for me. And I think this will for sure be a show that we continue to talk about for time. Yeah, for a long time after this. And season six, man, there was a lot going down, and some of it was shocking, to be honest. And a lot of those things I enjoyed, because I think a snow like Snowfall, 6 seasons is a lot. And that being said, they could have easily done something to make them go out comfortably, and I feel like they didn't do that, and I have to commend them for that because Snowfall is a show that has been throwing, somewhat some punches and some swings at some things, and I will always commend them for that. There was the episode where everyone was high. There's another episode with a tiger in it. You know what I'm saying? They've always, I think, tried to experiment every now and then to try to shake things up, and I think season six had maybe not anything in terms of super artistic weird things going on in season six, but in terms of story beats, I think they took some swings that I enjoyed. And so I think overall season six, man, it's a fine finale. I think so. I think it's a fine finale to the show. And I honestly I think John Singleton would be proud of the products that they finished on, man. I think they stayed true to the characters. I think they stayed true to what the show was really trying to say and supposed to be about. Yeah, and overall I think it was a fine experience and a fine watch. Yeah, a couple episodes in there I was like, I don't think I like this. In fact, season six probably has one of my like least favorite episodes in it. It's like episode two or three, and I was like, dang, this might be my least favorite episode like in this series in general. But other than that episode, man, I found myself enjoying week to week and having some pretty good conversations coming out of it, man. So I can't wait to see what the longevity of the show looks like. We'll talk about that stuff later. But I think season six was fine in my opinion.
Yeah, I've been very vocal about my thoughts of Snowfall over the years. I think that I have not been as big of a fan of this series as maybe other people within our circles that we talk to have been. But I do acknowledge and recognize that this show, for me, has certainly had flashes of brilliance. There have absolutely been moments that shocked me, surprised me, and made me look at the show in a different context and say like, oh, that was really, really well executed. That was really well done. I did notably have a very difficult time with the first couple of seasons. It just wasn't totally working for me. Just the structure of the show, it felt a little unfocused and kind of all over the place. But once season 3 kicked in, which I still think is their best season, everything really snapped into focus. You really started to see Franklin Saint assume this new prominence and this new power within the city of Los Angeles, and really, throughout the entire West Coast operation that he was running. And ever since then, with seasons 4, 5, and 6, it's been somewhat mixed results. I liked 4. Season 5 was a very, very weird watching experience. I think a lot of people watched season 5 and it was divisive, to say the least, in terms of the reaction and the receptivity to that season. But I think a lot of people definitely felt that it lost a lot of its steam, and many people were calling for the series to end, and were certainly just like, okay, clearly they have nothing else left to do and say, so let's just go ahead and wrap it up. And I think that with season 6, they certainly bounced back to a place of being confident in the writing, being confident in the storytelling, and bringing a nice, decisive conclusion to just all of these lingering stories and characters. Because it's a pretty large cast when you really think about just all the threads that the show ties together. And I think that overall, season 6 was a pretty decent watch as well, and overall made it all overall a very worthwhile experience in terms of shows that examine drug lords and kingpins and crime, especially within a specific era. And I really liked, especially like the second half of the season. I think just their ability to focus on much darker elements and to go into really deep, dark places, especially again when you're dealing with already difficult subject matter. I think that they stayed true to what the outcome would be likely for a lot of these people. I don't think that they did anything that was completely outlandish and would make you think like, oh, well, that would never happen.
Exactly.
And it's TV at the end of the day. There's always going to be some creative liberties, but I think from a historical context, and then just also from the context of like how the show has been built, all of the conclusions for many of these characters kind of made sense, because I think they did a good job of setting up those threads either last season or maybe a couple of previous seasons beforehand to get us in a place that just made sense for most of the people involved. And so it was pretty good to me. I really liked a couple of these episodes that definitely had me looking at it like, whoa, I didn't necessarily see that coming. And also the resolution of everything went in a different direction that I did not anticipate, which is always a really good thing, especially if it makes sense. And so I do want to just quickly talk about some of these specific details. And so want to send out a warning to people. If you've not watched any of Snowfall, especially season 6 and the series finale, we're going to spoil a couple of things here because it's just, important to talk about. And also the show's been out for quite a while, so I think it's fair game at this point. So feel free to spoil away, man. But I really want to just kind of get your thoughts on Franklin's fate at the end of this. The final episode of the series spends all of our time primarily with Franklin Saint. He is reeling off of the really crazy and shocking moments of the penultimate episode where we see Sissy kill the agent. I forget his name off the top of my head. He kills Teddy. She kills Teddy, and that just sends her in a different place mentally. She is willingly allowing herself to be locked up because she just kind of knows it's over. And Franklin is unwilling to accept that fact. He's doing everything that he can to try to get any amount of money that we can see him get to just try to hold on for dear life, at the end of this road. But we just kind of see him go on a tailspin, really for 60 minutes plus. And it's almost hard to watch, I would say, just seeing like how desperate he becomes, how little of a person he becomes, how much of his former self we just sort of see disappear before our very eyes. I mean, he just becomes almost unrecognizable, I think, by the end, both physically and figuratively. Like he becomes just a different person altogether. He's damn near homeless. He's begging for money. He has nothing to his name, and so those final moments of the series finale were really poignant, I would say, and sad and tragic. But what were your thoughts just about seeing, Franklin Saint undergo that really radical transformation from, sort of being at the top of the world for such a long time to hitting the absolute lowest of lows by the end of this whole story?
Yeah, I think depressing and sad, and all of those words make sense for the fate of Franklin. Man, this was a kid who was the most brilliant, of I think the people around him. And he was like, in a lot of ways, he was the smartest. I almost feel like he was applying. He never went to college, right? But I feel like he was applying collegiate level knowledge to the drug game, right? That he had become a part of. He had understood the business and become a drug lord in such a way that made him. The man was the Frank Lucas of his community. You know what I'm saying? Like the dude really was him. He was supplying everything. And I think he lived by that sword and also died. He didn't die, but died by that sword as well, right? And he the definition of reap what you sow, right? He was part of the reason why the crack epidemic hit in his specific neighborhood and all of those people were affected. And then he feels those repercussions later on down the line as well. He's now a product by the end. He's now a product of that same community. He has to live every day walking in his backyard, seeing crackheads on the streets that he probably helped orchestrate their lives as crackhead. And I think that made sense to me for his fate. It made sense that he had to bathe in the water that he created, in this dirty water that he created. And I think I like that as an ending for him, especially in some ways. He didn't become a crackhead, but in some ways he did again just turn out to be the person that he created in his almost homelessness, in his brokenness, in all of those things, man. And it's also, I mean, it always makes sense, right? We seen his mind slowly crack. When you get that much money stolen from you, I'm sure that all of Franklin is somebody who had become somewhat a provider for his family, right? And his mom, his uncle, his auntie, and all of those things crumbled in slow motion in front of him. Not only that, but his girlfriend slash wife slash baby mama dipped on him with the baby. And now, he spent so much time, again, not only looking for, I think, solace in knowing that he could take care of his family. That was a big thing for him, right? He was like, okay, Teddy, just give me half the money. I just need money to take care of my family, low key. And then when you don't get that, I can understand. I get why he snapped. There's a lot of things and a lot of things he worked towards that it was no longer in his possession that caused a spiral. And so I think all of that again just made sense in the heartbeat of the character and where he ended up, man. I think his fate makes sense. I really love the moments between him and Leon by the end, right, where they're both in tears. But Franklin is fessing up and saying, like, Leon, I'm proud of you. And Leon, he knows he can't really do anything about it either. And so to see your friend in such a place like this, and I think so fast too. Not that I think there was like a 2-year jump, right, from the safe scene into where we find him in the old house. In 2 years, yeah, it's not a long time, but it is at the same time. And to come back from somewhere and to see somebody in that state, it's almost like I feel I've almost had very similar interactions. Moving away, going to college, and you come back to Kansas City, and you see these people, and you're like, man. Like we used to be homeboys, you know what I'm saying? Like, you used to be you used to be one of my best friends, and now to see you in the state, man, it hurts, because I also know I can't do much. A lot of it is mental, and a lot of it is also structural. Franklin thought the cops were outside looking for him. Nobody's looking for you anymore, bro. It's been 2 years. Stuff is over. So I don't know. It's just a very interesting, I think, way to put that character to rest by, I think, again, putting him in a kind of a chamber of his own hell that he created. And so I didn't necessarily see it coming, but when I seen it, I was like, I think I like this. And I think this makes sense for the character that we see.
And I think kudos has to be given to the writers of the show, because we're so accustomed to seeing a lot of these crime kingpins a part of these different series over the years. They meet their demise either by murder or by ending up in jail. That's typically the outcome. Like, you're going to end up dead or in jail. And I think that we all just kind of assumed that would be the case for Franklin, but this is a lot more tragic because there is a twisted irony to it. Because at the end of this road, at the end of this journey for him, when we see him in the state that he's in the final moments of this finale, he ends up just like his father was before his father reached that place of sort of reclamation and reconciliation. His father was a recovering alcoholic and had no money, no resources, nothing to his name. And Franklin hated that. He detested that about his father. That was one of the hallmarks of the series for all these years. Franklin didn't drink because he didn't want to end up like his father. And then you see how he ends up at the end of the series, and it's like, wow, we oftentimes become a lot more like our parents than we like to admit. As much as we might prolong that fact or that idea, it comes around maybe even two or
Mm-hmm.
threefold at the end of the journey. And so when you see him in the state that he's in, and the fact that it reflects so much of what his father was for such a long time, it's quite frightening to see. And as you said, he is a product of his own making within the community that he helped not only build but destroy simultaneously at the same time. And it's just like it's really crazy stuff when you just understand that, this was a guy who fought to the bitter end. And there's that idea of like he has his freedom, quote unquote. He always harped on that idea that he would be free. He wouldn't allow himself to be constrained or weighed down by what society wanted out of him, by the idea of just working for another person. Like he was going to create and set up his own path for freedom. And as much as it sounds kind of crazy, he did do that at the end, although it's a very flawed idea because like how much of freedom do you really have when
Mm-hmm.
you have no money, you have no home, you have no resources, you have no friends, no family, like you have literally nothing left. Like you pretty much don't even have your sanity left. So that idea of freedom is very much flawed by the end of this. But those were like the first lines that he uttered in the series premiere, all those years ago. He wanted freedom from
Mm-hmm.
it all. That was kind of his idea and what he wanted to escape. And it looks different, I think, than he imagined, but there is a certain sense of not being able to conform to having end up in jail or dead or whatever the case may be. What could have been his ultimate fate if he had chosen to go down a different route. There were a lot of shocking moments this season, like I mentioned earlier. Sissy killing Teddy was crazy. Also, just like Jerome's death was like a pretty big moment. Seeing Franklin
Mm-hmm.
lose his uncle, the guy
Yeah.
that was next to him this entire time. Did you have a particularly shocking moment for you that stood out like above the rest of them, or I mean even between those two really seminal moments, which sort of stood out to you more as like
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see that coming, I couldn't have predicted that would go that way?
Man, to be honest, I've seen a couple of those things coming. Specifically, Jerome's death was very foreshadowed to me. There's the scene where he's at his boy's garage, the mechanic's garage, and people are going back and forth in a car, clearly because Jerome is there, wanting some kind of smoke or scoping out where Jerome is. Between that and Jerome literally telling Louis that he doesn't want to be in the drug game anymore, I was like, man, Jerome. This I don't think he's gonna last very long. So that one wasn't as shocking to me, I don't think. But I think a moment that was kind of shocking was the torture of Teddy was a little shocking. And it's not even the concept of torture, it's the way they tortured him. The grease on the chest is insane. It is one of the most inhumane, I think, forms of torture I've ever seen. Like we've watched a lot of movies, a lot of TV shows. It's very rare you see something like that where somebody's literally cooking grease on a stove and pouring it on their chest. It's really crazy and fucked up when you think about it, because yeah, it's literally you're melting somebody's flesh. I can't, like, I waterboard him or something, you know what I'm saying? Like melting his chest is crazy. So I think that was one of the more shocking moments for me in terms of story beats, just seeing how dark of a place that Franklin has gotten into. Okay, I will add to that. This is like a 1-2 punch. The killing of Teddy's dad was kind of crazy as well. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think I seen it coming in that way. I knew Franklin was threatening Teddy. I knew that something was. I thought he was going to hold him hostage for a little bit, because it's even between Veronique's mom and Teddy's dad. They were having cool little interactions. She was trying to get him to dance, and then Franklin just kind of slits the nigga's throat. You know what I'm saying? Kind of just ends him. And so I think that was a really big shocking moment. So probably between that and the torture of Teddy, those are two like really surprising, I think, moments for me to show, I think, how crazy Franklin had gotten, how the dude has lost his marbles. And I think, the killing of Teddy's dad was one, and then the torture of Teddy himself was another. And I think they kind of go hand in hand with shocking moments for me.
Yeah, they veered again darker, much darker this season. Outside of like Sissy killing Teddy in that moment, which in the way that it happened just kind of came out, and it was so quick in how it happened. But I
Pretty
think
wild.
earlier in the
Mm-hmm.
season, seeing what Louis experienced, and that was almost an element of torture that she was exposed to. She was about to get pretty much gang raped in
Mm,
that scene before Jerome, the same episode that Jerome
yeah.
ultimately met
Wow.
us in. But just that whole preceding section,
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at that like, wow, we are starting to really stretch. Like
Yeah.
this is kind of getting really wild here. Please do not go through with this. But I think that they walked a fine line between showing like this is extremely brutal and it's very difficult to watch, but also not going all the way with it, because at a certain point, you just don't want to see something like that.
Hmm.
Like I don't want to watch any show that has that certain type of element in it. Where we're talking about raping women on camera and stuff, like I just don't want to see that. But the fact that they toyed with it was also just like very frightening, right? And it was just like one of those things that continued to raise the stakes of the series, and you just see how that impacts everybody, and like the fact that Franklin has to, sort of like put aside all of his differences, just for the greater good of trying to figure this whole thing out and eliminate his enemies. Like that was a crazy sequence.
Hmm.
So yeah, this season definitely had a lot of moments that were just like, wow, I didn't expect him to go there. As we wrap up here, I just want to, quickly get your thoughts on what do you think the legacy of Snowfall will ultimately be? Again, sort of pairing it against the lexicon of just like other shows that we've gotten over the years of crime focused shows, especially when we look at an anti-hero really is our main protagonist, somebody that we're not
Yeah.
really supposed to root for, but at the same time you do kind of root for because you want to see how far they can really go with it, and you also know that their circumstances are kind of created outside of their own control, and so they're really working within the confines of what they have at their disposal. But what are you overall thoughts about just like where the show will fall just in the larger general discourse and just its legacy and how it will hold up over the years?
Yeah, I really love Snowfall, man. Thinking about these years that we've been watching it as a unit, between the tweets and discussions, it's a really good, I think, addition to all of those shows that you're talking about: Boardwalk Empire, Sopranos, The Wire. I don't think it broke TV like some of those shows did, but I do think it is a great addition to add to those conversations of antiheroes, of great drug shows, of good performances, man. This dude Damson Idris came in and made a name for himself off of one role. If you want to get into it and talk about it, man. And I think even beyond Snowfall, the Franklin Saint will live, I think, beyond the show as a legacy. But I think this show, I think it will be in those conversations of, again, maybe not breaking TV, right? Like Breaking Bad and Sopranos and The Wire. But I think when people bring up those shows, there are moments in Snowfall that people will also add to that conversation and talk about as well. And I think that cements the legacy as well. But again, between the show and between Damson Idris as Franklin Saint, I think it will live on. Not only that, there's like some random spinoff coming, right? Between Leon and Wanda, of them, I don't know, doing hip hop or something like they're entering the rap game. And so I think there will be ties, right, made to Snowfall, between Snowfall and that show, that will keep the conversation going for sure. But I think, again, as this as a standalone project in Snowfall, man, I think it will remain in conversation as one of the greats, if not really goods, and I think that's also important. I think that's a good spot to be in, especially as you kind of said. This Snowfall was a TV show with a black guys. It was made with John Singleton. It was made in some ways for us by us, right? And I love that about it. And I think that adds a different lens than some of those other shows. Some of those other shows do, and it is more modern, though, given a take of the '80s in things of that nature. So yeah, I think it will always be, I think, helmed as, again, one of the better drug shows that we've gotten. And if you don't say that, you have to give it to Damson Idris as Franklin Saint. I think is a character that might live forever.
Yeah, that's kind of where I fall with it. I think the show as a whole has been pretty solid to good, and as I said earlier, flashes of brilliance at particular moments in time. But I think the creation of Franklin Saint as a character is really where this show will endure, and that's where it'll hold up ultimately. I think that's the strongest asset that we can speak about Snowfall, and Damson Idris just being the anchor and the focal point of everything that we've seen at this point. He's been absolutely incredible. He's come in and certainly just made his stamp and his mark in terms of television anti-heroes. And when we talk about the list of greatest characters and greatest anti-heroes in the history of the medium, I think he deserves to be a part of that conversation for sure. And I think, again, he offered something
Mm-hmm.
new. He offered a younger character than we're typically used to seeing, somebody with a lot of charisma, and
For
also
sure.
really focusing on the element of family without having much direct family to even tie himself to. He had to go to his extended family to really bring them into the fold. And overall, I think there was a lot of style, a lot of flash, a lot of really, really cool things that Snowfall did that haven't necessarily been done in other series. And again, John Singleton is the guy, the brainchild behind this whole thing. I mean, his legacy speaks for itself. He's already, one of the great directors that we've ever had, and certainly rest in peace to him. And it was also nice at the end of the show to see that moment, that tribute that they had to Boys in the Hood, that little Easter egg when Franklin and Leon
Mm-hmm.
were walking
Yeah.
down the finale. That was a nice, cool sort of passing of the torch, to the guy that started it. It was a very full circle moment, I think, and I think that that just kind of speaks to just the ideas and the things that John Singleton brought to everything that he ever done. So overall, really, really good show, really, really satisfying ending, I would say, and I certainly can't wait to see just how the legacy of Snowfall will endure over the years. But folks, those are all of our thoughts on season 6 and the series finale of Snowfall. If you've checked out the series on FX, hit us up and let us know what you think.